College football nerds here to talk what in the world happened in Georgia and Notre Dame. We did a preview on this game, and we generally try to pick one or two games that we did previews on to talk about after, especially if they were interesting. So that's what we're doing here. Please remember, subscribe and like, even if y'all were the Georgia fans that were mad because we accidentally said that Holloman was playing and he's not. Just want to address that real quick because everybody got mad. We said in our season preview, we talked in depth about how Holloman was no longer on the team. So y'all that got mad, sorry about it. We also mentioned and got absolutely killed for the fact, I think I mentioned this, that Pickens hasn't come on yet. That wasn't a slight to Pickens. Y'all killed us in our... You should know this. You killed us in our preview, our season preview, because we didn't list Pickens as a starter. He's still not a starter, and he had no catches in this game, although he had one that was really close to being a touchdown. Some of the other Georgia wide receivers really stepped up in this game, and I think that was part of the story in this game. But for me, Josh, if we're doing a review of this kind of a post-mortem, we were all over this game in our predictions. I think I predicted a 6-point spread. I think I said 27-21. I think you said 31-21. We were all over the score. And I think that frustrated some Georgia fans. It was a 14-point spread. We thought it was going to be a closer game. I think they took that as a slight to their team. And it was not a slight to their team. A little kind of tip ahead of, we're going to do a top 10 here in a minute. I got Georgia number 2. I think it was more, for me, was respect for Notre Dame. And we've watched a ton of Notre Dame football the last few years. And I've just felt like they're very fundamentally sound, very well coached. And I just thought, just like the last time they played Notre Dame, Georgia has more talent than Notre Dame, but Notre Dame is still a really good team. I think they're a legit top 10 team. I think now Georgia has the best win of any team this year. So is that the feeling that you got when we were talking about this game, and maybe we didn't articulate it well enough, that picking a close game in this one wasn't because we thought anything bad about Georgia? There was a lot of question marks because they hadn't played anybody yet, but it was more about thinking good about Notre Dame?
I think so, and we tried to flush out where we thought positives and negatives were, and it was kind of amazing the backlash we got in certain ways. And yeah, I mean, we had the one, we flubbed in listing off receivers and saying, here's a bunch of explosive guys, and in listing off names, we included Holloman, really including Holloman, and leaving off Blaylock just because, we're listing off names at random. This game was a game where you had two really good teams going against each other, and you could have things that were relative strengths that may not be strengths against this opponent because of how good they were in other areas. I didn't really feel like going into this game that it was to Notre Dame's advantage to rely on Ian Book that much. From what I had seen from Notre Dame going into it, I felt like Book had been a little off all year. His decision-making wasn't always great. He wasn't always fast enough pulling the trigger. And what we'd seen from Georgia last year was that when they really got pushed, we felt like maybe their run defense would give a little bit. But it was all supposition. I mean, we had no data. And we really tried to drive home that point. We had no data. I mean, with 2 games against FBS level play and not particularly good teams that you're playing, we can't tell you how good a team is. And so we sort of just had to draw a little bit off past years and whatnot. But by and large, I think our conclusions weren't totally off. I did think that Georgia was a really good team. I mean, both of us had Georgia winning the game. I had Georgia winning by double digits. That's not an insult to Georgia. I think people were just surprised or, maybe didn't understand that Notre Dame is a very good team. This is not the Notre Dame that they beat 2 years ago, where Georgia at that point really wasn't the team they were at the end of the season and would have crushed Notre Dame later that year. It's certainly not the Notre Dame that lost in 2012 really badly. This is a really, really good team, and Kelly has made them a very competitive high-end unit.
Yeah, and I know we do say that you can tell, you can glean some things by watching a good team against a bad team in certain areas. But look, we're not going to get much at 63-37 versus Murray State when the next week they lost to Toledo 45-0. We're just not. There's nothing there. Georgia could roll out their water boy at quarterback, never throw the ball, and still put up 40 points. So that makes it really hard. Georgia has a hard schedule this year, so we're not killing them for scheduling. It just happened to be that those games were front loaded, and they didn't get any help from Vanderbilt, who's just absolutely atrocious this year. This is a bad Vanderbilt team for Vanderbilt, so that's saying a lot. Okay, talking about Georgia real quick in terms of what we see in the season going forward, we knew Swift was a dude, and he showed up in this game like we all thought he might. The numbers for Fromm were a little off in the first half. Danielson wouldn't shut up about it. Like, I think he was like 11 for 12, but only had like 50, 60 yards or something like that. We saw late in the game, especially with some balls that weren't completed, like that fade on the right side of the end zone. Fromm's got all the tools. He's a great quarterback. I think he's going to really be there come postseason if they need him. I don't know what happened in the Texas game, but did we see anything from the defense besides JRE that we could take from this and say, okay, they've got what they need on offense. Do they have everything they need on defense to make a run at a championship?
I think so. And the biggest thing that we saw from Georgia in this game was a constant ability to attack the line of scrimmage and be aggressive across the football field. I felt like Georgia was very fast, very physical, and most of the plays that Notre Dame had success with in the game were really misdirection plays. I mean, the leading receiver is Cole Kmet at 9 receptions, 108 yards. And the main reason for that is Notre Dame didn't have a lot of confidence in their ability to throw downfield, and they didn't really feel like they had a ton of confidence, I guess, in the run game. We're probably going to want to touch on balance later because it was a weird storyline in terms of how this game played out. But Georgia was able to consistently get pressure and sort of move the line of scrimmage. They were able to play aggressive man coverage downfield, prototypical Kirby Smart defense. And they were able to do it with a lot of success. I think the linebackers had some glitches throughout the game. Really, the second half, those got ironed out for the most part. By and large, Georgia is a fast, physical, attacking defense. And there were really no points where I felt like they were weak. And if you're able to be that fast and physical throughout, at all three phases defensively, and that's despite the fact that like Stokes goes out with an injury, so you're really a little bit depleted in terms of depth. I think that says a tremendous amount for where Georgia's at defensively. And again, last year they had some weaknesses where they could be exploited. This year, I don't necessarily see that. I think they're going to be a tough out for every team to be able to score on, which is a problem because the offense is also quite good.
True or false, this is the best offense that Georgia's going to see for the rest of the year until the postseason?
I would say, and I'm trying to think through the schedule, I think that's not only true, it's probably true by a wide margin.
Agreed.
I mean, South Carolina, I think, has potential. I mean, Helinski had 2 really good games before he had an awful one. It just sort of depends on whether or not that really was an injury situation and how much healthier he can get. And that's 3 weeks away. But looking through the rest of the schedule, I mean, Kentucky is not very good. Florida with Trask has looked competent. That's about as much as I can say. Missouri is not really good. Auburn is terrible. Texas A&M is terrible, especially away, which will be at Georgia. Georgia Tech is the worst team they've had in like 3 decades. So when you go down the list, I'm not even considering Tennessee. I'm just pretending they don't exist this year in terms of SEC teams. It's less embarrassing that way. I don't see not just to say that Notre Dame is the best offense. I don't frankly see another good offense on the rest of the schedule. So I'm not sure they're going to be tested until the SEC championship game, where frankly LSU or Alabama is going to be at a completely different level than anybody else they've seen all season.
Yeah, and I don't want Georgia fans to be fooled by that top 10 ranking of Auburn if they haven't seen Auburn play yet. Auburn's offense is bad. It's not. There's no nuance. There's no context missing. Auburn's offense is bad. Bo Nix had 100 yards passing and like under 5 yards in an attempt versus a trash secondary for Texas A&M. So I think that's their ranking is all on their defense. So I don't even want to go there. On the flip side, for Notre Dame, there's a lot of talk about how I know I saw Kirk Herbstreit say that Notre Dame has improved their standing for being a playoff team. I don't know if that's the case, but I do think that they proved that they could hang with a playoff caliber team. Looking at their schedule, do they have another team that's even going to challenge them? And if so, could they win out, go 11-1, but a close win versus a team that would challenge them on their remaining schedule would do more damage to them than the loss to Georgia?
I think Notre Dame's going to be under the microscope due to the lack of the conference championship game, due to the fact that they have a loss. And again, when we talk about this in the playoff scenario, I don't really care what my own perspective is on who should make the playoff. This discussion has to totally focus on how the playoff committee is going to view it. I think USC is probably the biggest challenge left on Notre Dame's schedule. I don't think USC is a particularly good team, frankly, but we talked about this doing a USC preview earlier. USC's offensive style due to their receivers is probably going to translate against a lot of teams. I think they can potentially score points against just about anybody. So that's probably the game that's the most losable. Michigan is bad. Their defense, I think, is pretty good, but it's collapsing under the weight of an absolute disaster offensively. UVA is solid. I think the 18 ranking is silly. It's just the byproduct of
somebody in the ACC's got to be ranked besides Clemson.
And that is the tendency that people do. Frankly, the ACC is. I kind of hate using the word, but the ACC is trash. It's terrible. And that's kind of the problem that Notre Dame has. I mean, they have that tie-in with the ACC. The ACC is, and we talked about this last year, and it's true this year, they are historically weak. By their own standards, this is a multi-decade slump. Top to bottom, they're bad. I mean, Boston College, it turns out to be absolutely terrible. Maybe Duke. I mean, when you're saying Duke, that's not a good team, might be the best team they play in November. It's just not tough. So they're going to be under a massive microscope. They really need to destroy Michigan. They need to destroy USC, and they can't afford many close games against the rest of the competition because they just don't have any margin for error.
I think that's fair, and I think your ACC point is fair to the point that, like, if you think last year, NC State was decent. Boston College was decent. NC State is far worse than they were last year, and that team lost 52-13 to Texas A&M in the bowl game. Virginia struggled with ODU last week, pulled away in the fourth quarter versus ODU, and is ranked 18th. So I think right now the pollsters are just like, y'all, give me something. I agree with you. I wonder, though, like, you said USC could score anybody, but you also just picked Washington to beat them pretty good. I think that Michigan defense could turn a game ugly, but I have no faith in the Michigan offense. I do think they're under a microscope. I think they need to handle their business. And this is where, like, they no longer really control their own destiny, but they really, really don't control their own destiny if they beat USC 24-21. Like, that's my thing. It's like, okay, you don't entirely control it because you have a loss. You open the window for either a second SEC team or a Pac-12 champion or something like that to get in. You've got to hammer everybody the rest of the way. And if they don't, I'm a little concerned. Okay, so for Georgia, we talked about how they may not face another good offense, or they definitely won't face another good offense the rest of the year. Are you concerned that it's going to be a shock to them if they see an elite offense, kind of like Georgia versus Baker Mayfield a few years ago, where they didn't see a lot of good offenses throughout the regular season? And it really took them a half of football to adjust to that offense, and they almost dug themselves too deep a hole. Is that a concern if you're a Georgia fan? No matter how good your defense is, there's no preparation like actually facing good offenses for an SEC championship game where the season might be tight enough that a second SEC team isn't getting in the playoffs this year.
So there's two sides to this coin. And the first side of the coin is I don't think it's good for teams not to be proven. And there's this sort of tagline going around, and it's mostly whining from Alabama fans that, oh, Clemson plays weak competition, so it's so much easier for them to be in the playoffs. How many years did Alabama trumpet how good they were in the postseason because they had a hard schedule?
Right.
I mean, that was their moniker for years and years and years. And now all of a sudden they want to flip it on its head just because they lost. And I think the truth of the matter is it does help you to have a difficult schedule. And you think back to some of the teams that won championships. The biggest one that stands out in my mind is probably 2006 Florida, which was a good team, but they were not a world beater. And then they went in the national title game and just thumped their opponent because they were a lot more proven. And I just don't think Ohio State was really ready for them. Or if you look at another example, 2008, Oklahoma, and that was the Sam Bradford year, wasn't it? That Oklahoma team was the greatest offense ever. I mean, total billing, put up 1 million points in every game, and they came in, played Florida, and Florida knew what it meant to play in a big, tight game. Oklahoma didn't, and Florida pulled out a close win. I mean, everybody thinks about how good Florida was in 2008, and I think they forget that Oklahoma was the favorite that season. It's just they were more battle-tested. So I do think it's a problem for Georgia that they're not being tested defensively. I think they probably could be a really, really good defense and experience a little bit of a shock because I think it's going to be LSU or Alabama, 100% out of the SEC West. I don't see any way that it couldn't be. Those teams are going to have a tremendously better passing attack than anything they've seen. And while I think the aggression is going to translate in terms of your ability to sort of hit a switch and keep pressing, maybe there's a little bit of shock when the ball comes out and, your opponent is now hitting one-on-one coverage and you start giving up points and you start sort of second-guessing everything and you get in a funk. The flip side to it, though, with Georgia is there is an advantage. This is the other side of the coin. Their defense is going to shut down a lot of these teams in the rest of the schedule, and the offense is going to put up a ton of points in these games. What that means is they're going to be able to rest their starters. And that was the Clemson advantage last season. I mean, the biggest, we can nitpick all these reasons why Clemson won the national title, but I don't think there's any doubt that a major advantage they have was that they were healthy. They were able to pull their starters consistently the entire season. They didn't have a grinding end of the season stretch. And the winner out of the SEC, which has generally been Alabama, has been beaten up in the postseason most years due to the grind at the end of the schedule. Georgia should stay pretty healthy. You can't guarantee no injuries, even against bad teams. It still happens. But not being in those grinding out contests, not having to chase guys flying all around the field full speed, but being able to keep things in front of you in games is really going to help their ability to avoid injury. And I think that is probably the thing that will help Georgia the most.
All right, real quick, I'm going to give you the last word on this one. Since Georgia won, if Notre Dame won, I'd be asking you this question about them. But since Georgia won, give me something that not everybody maybe saw that you saw give me one concern that you saw from them that maybe you didn't think you'd see going into the game. So one concern for Georgia and one maybe not so obvious real positive you took away from this game from Georgia.
I think the biggest concern that I got out of Georgia, if you nail me to the wall, is probably the fact that they gave up so much yardage to the tight ends. I thought the linebackers at times struggled a little bit in pass coverage, and there were a lot of times guys got across the formation and got open. Ian Book has not been a super effective passer against better defenses. So there are signs there that teams can sort of finesse guys open against Georgia, much the same way that happened to Alabama last year with their linebackers. I don't think it's nearly that bad. Really, there's just not a lot of negatives to take from this game. That's probably the biggest one. In terms of positives, I think the biggest thing to me was how many guys were involved and how good they were. Lawrence Cager had 5 receptions in that game. He only had 5 receptions in the preceding 3 games. It really wasn't expected for him to be the guy that stepped up. Robertson, we kind of expected. We knew that he was good. It's good to see him evolve. I mean, he's got all the talent in the world. But then you got things like Harrion stepping up, getting 8 carries for a 5.3 yard per carry average. Really as effective per carry as DeAndre Swift was. So I think the biggest thing for me with Georgia, with a team that had a lot of question marks, particularly receiver, just in terms of overall skill position depth, they had a lot of options and not a lot of proven ones. I think we're starting to see things develop into more proven options. And I think that's probably the most encouraging thing from Georgia.
And I completely agree with you in terms of options. And, we were a little smug about it in the beginning that Pickens, didn't get a catch and isn't playing that much. He is seeing the field. He's not getting a ton of catches, but I think it's a good thing that he's not like the focus, even though he came in as super capable, clearly talented. The big thing was, Georgia lost their top 7 pass receivers or whatever from last year. So who's going to catch the ball? I guess we're going to have to lean on this freshman. The fact that other guys stepped up is a really, really good thing. And I think that people are taking it maybe as a negative, and it's not. It's actually a huge positive for them. All right, y'all, that's it for our review of Georgia and Notre Dame. Both excellent teams, both, in our opinion, are in our top 10. And Georgia rocking the best win of the season. By the way, for everybody that's like SEC is Alabama and everybody else, the SEC has the 3 top highest ranked wins this season so far of all the teams and all the conferences combined, and not one of them is from Alabama. So, all right, y'all, thanks so much. Have a great week. Get at us in the comments. We love you even when you hate us. Have a good one. God bless.